we would hear now from our respondent voices. Those of you who are officially designated as respondents, would you come quickly to the stage? Now, we want to remind you that we have 3 minutes for our respondent voices. And we're only saying this because we know that many of you have come from work. You're probably tired, a little bit weary, and have other appointments. And we certainly also want to hear from Dr. Safi and allow him enough time to sort of tie all of this together and synthesize everything that we have heard. So if you would just simply come and give us your name, remind us of who you are, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Felicia Arriaga. First I'd like to say thank you for the invitation to be involved in this much needed conversation which links our struggles together, particularly in the current political climate we find ourselves, where both local and presidential candidates continue to demonize and criminalize communities of color. As an advisory board member of the Durham Solidarity Center, I see this as an opportunity to continue building across our individual struggles so that we can put forward policies and solutions for and by our people. For us, this means building a broad coalition of organizations which will hold space, like Jillian mentioned, and raise people's issues. We began making this a reality back in May when we called for a May Day demonstration, which brought together workers, and it was a space dedicated to workers in particular. And since then, we've transitioned into creating the Triangle May Day Unity Coalition, which we invite everyone to join. Almost 2 weeks ago, this coalition went to the governor's debate that was held to raise these people issues directly to the candidates and to make a way for our voices to be heard and to be taken seriously, something that we'll continue to do as we plan for our People's Assembly in December. Some of the things that we preliminarily demanded was a stop to police violence and murders, the end to cooperation with Immigration and Customs Enforcement through local law enforcement, the welcoming of Syrian refugees, and an end to Islamophobia, and $15 an hour minimum wage and collective bargaining rights for all workers. The first 3 demands directly speak to the efforts to attempt to maintain control of communities of color in particular, and particularly more important, and importantly to me, being the daughter of a Mexican immigrant, is the way that we've also seen those particular practices being implemented against Latinx populations here in North Carolina in particular as well. Through my work with immigrant rights groups and in my research, I see these 3 communities being subjected to similar racist policies and policing, which are also driven by financial gain. 1 in 3 Black men are likely to be imprisoned in their lifetime, and 1 in 6 Latino men are likely to be the same. But we all know of deaths of people of color at the hands of law enforcement, and we most recently saw how this law enforcement responded in the Charlotte uprising, with chemicals, riot gear, and repressive surveillance tactics like rearresting freedom fighters 2, 3, and 4 times. These surveillance tactics by the state and by ordinary people are similar for those perceived to be Muslim here within this country, and is exemplified in the recent cases ranging from that of Abdul Aziz to the woman who was set on fire in New York. These tactics directed at immigrants in particular, both by the state and by individuals, are also attempts to create a culture of self-deportation, something which many politicians continue to advocate for, even when deportation by the state has moved inward from the border and other ports of entry. That is why we wanted to highlight the cooperation between ICE and local law enforcement in our demands, which is operating throughout this state and across the country. We know that communities of color are over-policed on a regular basis, and for those who are immigrants, an encounter with local law enforcement equals exuberant fines for driving without a license, at the least, and the potential for deportation at the worst. There are many groups in the Triangle May Day Coalition and beyond who are interested in linking these challenges for communities of color at the hands of criminal justice system and immigration systems. And we look forward to deepening those conversations, particularly with local officials who have the power to end these information sharing programs and instead enact an environment of safety for all people in this area. We must begin thinking about how the criminal justice system penalizes immigrants differently than their non-citizen counterparts in order to truly understand how something like the recent ending of private prison contracts announced by the Justice Department doesn't do anything about their major deals with the U.S. Marshals Service and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement agencies. At the crux of these issues, we are fighting for control over our own lives instead of the self-policing of our communities that is encouraged by those who want to control us. And when we are able to determine our own lives and our futures, then we will no longer be under this current oppression. Thank you.
Good evening. Buenas noches. All right. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm very inspired by the panel tonight. Obviously, I wanted to share a little bit about my native language in Spanish, but also I've been inspired by all the stories and the faces I see in the room. I was born in Mexico, but I came to the U.S. when I was younger. And just listening to the presentations, I was thinking about the different layers that liberation struggles have. I was thinking about my home country and how we also have had Native Americans and Afro-Mexicanos and many different people and mestizos that have been oppressed. And in a sense, now myself and my family and many others have moved to another country, and now we're here. And we're part of the same conversation, and I'm really glad to be here. My name is Ramon Cepeda, and I'm with Student Action with Farm Workers. We're a local nonprofit here in Durham, but we work across North Carolina and South Carolina and the Southeast. Our mission is to bring students and farm workers together to learn about each other's lives, share resources and skills, and work together to build coalitions for social change. I'm not only representing my organization, but I'm also representing myself, my state. I live in North Carolina now. This is where I finished high school, went to college at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Been exposed to different struggles for sure, and especially around worker justice. Through my involvement with Student Action with Farm Workers and in my university studies, I got involved with labor organizing, with social justice organizations. And ever since, I've been learning so much about things that I didn't even know before that are so real and impact my family and my community. But when I think about the word liberation, again, I think about worker justice. And today I wanted to share a message about farm workers and who farm workers are. There are currently 2 to 3 million farm workers in the US. About 150,000 in North Carolina during the peak season. And by farm workers, we mean people that till the soil, plant, harvest, pick the crops, pack them in the sheds, and even transport them to our supermarkets. There are people that work in other crops like tobacco. There are people that work in animal farms, in factory farms where they kill or harvest chickens, hogs, cut them, process them, and because of them, we have foods on our tables every day. We choose to focus on farm workers because we believe that farm workers continue to face oppression even today. Although many farm workers are US citizens, the majority are immigrants and have recently moved from another state or from another country to follow the crop, to follow the jobs. And farm workers today are still excluded from major protections that protect other workers, such as overtime pay. Farm worker can work up to 80 hours a week, and they might not be entitled to getting overtime pay. And this is in the federal law. They're excluded from these laws. Other laws, such as minimum wage laws, protections to collectively bargain if workers want to join each other and demand better working conditions or wages, the employer can retaliate against them and fire them, and they're not protected. There's also lack of protections when it comes to child labor. Someone mentioned access to education being a really important topic to discuss. And farm worker children can work as young as 10 years old with parent permission. So farm workers, a child can go work in the fields instead of going to school, and the law says that it's fine for a 10-year-old to work in the fields. If you want to work in a fast food restaurant, you probably have to be older than that. And so the farm worker struggle is very present today because the conditions that in the fields have changed very little. I know that we're in a room with very knowledgeable people, and we know that this country was built on slavery. The people that work in the fields, it was free labor. Eventually, when workers started to organize and demand that the agricultural system changed, they were slowly being replaced. There were other groups of people that came to work in the fields. Native Americans, indentured slaves, Africans, Asians. Later there were the Latinx, the Mexican immigrants, Central American. We've seen a lot of Haitian workers as well. It feels like whenever there's a country that has a lot of struggles happening and people move to the U.S., they take the jobs that have the least protection, such as farm work. So we're here because we want to raise awareness and encourage everybody to also join the movement for farm worker justice. We believe that we need to address the root of the problem. If we don't change the laws, if we don't include farm workers in these protections that protect other workers, then we're going to continue to have the same cycle. Today it might be the majority Mexican immigrants or Central American immigrants. They might move to other jobs or eventually be replaced by another group, and who knows what tomorrow brings. So again, thank you for inviting me. I do want to encourage students and everybody here to join and learn about student action with farm workers. We have internship programs for college students. I would encourage students at NC Central to look us up, but also the community in general, consumers. We all eat food, so we all depend on farm workers. I would encourage you to also check out campaigns that are led by farm workers, by workers themselves. There's a campaign by the Farm Labor Organizing Committee, FLOC. They're organizing tobacco workers, pressuring R.J. Reynolds, one of the largest tobacco companies in the world, to sit down and negotiate a contract with the workers to address the wages, to address the workplace issues, the concerns that the farm workers have. There's also a campaign for tomato pickers in Florida, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. They're putting pressure on corporations like Wendy's. If you eat at Wendy's, look up the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, please. And they're also targeting Publix, a new supermarket in town that purchases tomatoes from Florida, but are not willing to have conversations with the very people that harvest the tomatoes when they want to talk about improving their working and living conditions. I'm more than happy to continue to having this conversation. Thank you again.
Good evening. My name is Beth Brooke. I'm proud to say I'm a graduate of the School of Library and Information Science at NCCU, and I am here representing Jewish Voice for Peace Triangle Chapter. And I'm really honored to be here, and I thank you. I appreciate the way this panel focuses on on linking liberation struggles, because the connections between us and between our struggles for our bodies, for our lives, are real. We cannot and should not have to compartmentalize the different parts of ourselves and our struggles. For example, my group, Jewish Voice for Peace, supports freedom from occupation and self-determination in Israel-Palestine. We have seen the way militarization, occupation, and racist oppression by the Israeli state have informed and been informed by U.S. policies. Municipal police forces in the U.S. regularly participate in programs where members travel to Israel to train with the Israeli Defense Force. It's happened in Durham. Our new police chief led such trips when she worked in Atlanta, and the police force in Ferguson, Missouri had trained with the Israeli Defense Force prior to Michael Brown's murder and the ensuing suppression of the people protesting there. And as Borhan said, the Palestinian people recognized similarities in the struggles when they used Twitter to assist participants in the movement for Black Lives in dealing with the tear gas, since both groups experienced the same American-made tear gas. Oppressed people also look to each other's victories to determine how to achieve liberation. In 2005, Palestinian civil society issued a call, issued a call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions of the Israeli occupation. This was inspired by the South African anti-apartheid struggle, which was in turn benefited from the civil rights movement in the United States, which in turn benefited from Gandhi's nonviolent movement in India. Another link I see between struggles is the erasure of the effects of U.S. foreign policy and domestic policies from public discourse. The media talks about undocumented people and refugees, but not about what policies of ours create or contribute to displacement. The media talks about radical Islam as a violent religious sect, but ignores the possibility of a political response to drone attacks, invasion, and years of occupation. We need accountability and honest introspection. There are many more links in our struggles, from the way Islamophobic legislation such as the anti-Sharia law bill introduced by Wake County's own Representative Avila also initially included attacks on women's health. Transphobic legislation like HB2 includes attack on working people by restricting minimum wages and also limits everyone's rights to recourse when employers discriminate. So please vote. There's early voting on campus here. And if you are interested in fighting Islamophobia with Jewish Voice for Peace, or the movement to end racism and Islamophobia, of which you're a coalition member, please join us. If you're interested in working for change within Jewish communities, please join us. And if you are interested in participating in our coalition on boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns that target the Israeli occupation of Palestine, please join us. You can find us on the web, on Facebook, at Jewish Voice, or either or, at Jewish Voice for Peace, Triangle, North Carolina. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Tennyson Wellborn, and I'm a member of the Cheyenne Arapaho Tribes of Oklahoma. The position of the American Indian is unique in this country, but it's not by accident. Many are exiles from their own ancestral land, with many psychologically and spiritually alienated from their own heritage. For almost 2 centuries now, the American government approach towards the original inhabitants of this land was removal, eradication, confinement, and assimilation. In the early 19th century, legal tactics, especially here in the South, were used to nullify tribal sovereignty and therefore be able to forcibly remove any American Indian nation from their own ancestral lands. Post-Civil War, though, a much harsher hand was used as a long and bloody war was fought between the U.S. military and multiple tribal nations west of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. By the end of the 19th century, nearly all tribal nations either willingly or forcibly surrendered to U.S. military forces. And it's an age-old tactic of an invading force that fears a homegrown resistance is to confine and control the native population. And to this end, tribal nations were confined to destitute plots of land known as reservations. And it sounds much like what happened with, as Dr. Ghanayem pointed out, in Israel. And for Palestinians, armed conflict, disease, and starvation rapidly took its toll on tribal nation populations. And with reservation confinement, inadequate food and medical supply distribution only exacerbated those issues. The U.S. government then pushed its policy of assimilation by forcibly removing children from their families to attend government and religiously run boarding schools, as was covered by my friend, Dr. Ben. The government's policies were of physical incapacitation through those reservation confinements, as well as the psychological and spiritual eradication of tribal identity. Those were actively resisted, though. Where reservations were meant for tribal nations to be left to die or be forgotten, it ironically gave them a chance to recover their population numbers. There's basically their own baby boom generation happening in the early 20th century, in the early 1900s. And where those children who suffered in government boarding schools throughout early to mid 20th century then formed national indigenous organizations, such as the Congress of American Indians in the 40s, the National Indian Youth Council, and the American Indian Movement in the 60s. Spectacular demonstrations followed, such as the 1969 takeover of Alcatraz Island, the occupation of Bureau of Indian Affairs offices in Washington, D.C. in 1970, and probably most notably, the 71-day armed standoff with federal agents at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Now, those demonstrations in scale and scope were in danger of being remembered only as belonging to those heady times of the late 60s, 70s. But of course, that all changed with Standing Rock. And Standing Rock was by no accident either. You see this resistance happening with those that come from this land, that hold this land sacred in a way that a religious person holds a temple or a church sacred, or listen to that favorite song or your child's voice. Think of the feeling that that gives you and what you would do to fight for that. Our Native American nations feel that way when they look at a river or a mountain. You know, as me and my friend Dr. Ben was discussing where I live now near Cherokee, looking at those mountains and those areas, you can't help but feel like you're home. And it's by no accident, over 150 nations, different tribal nations, including my own, the Cheyenne Arapaho of Oklahoma, have joined up with the Standing Rock Sioux. Those different bands of Sioux, the Standing Rock, Cheyenne River, Ogallala, Rosebud. Some of them haven't even joined together. They haven't been banded together like this way since they fought Custer. There's been formal ceremonies, and as well as our tribe have banded together with the Northern Cheyenne and the Northern Arapaho. It's an amazing sight, but the immediate tactical thing that you can do here tonight is, as Dr. Ben linked on, for the Sacred Stone Camp, they have a legal fund going on to help bail out. I think over 100 people were arrested over this last weekend. One of the cutest things, but heartwarming things I've seen is that on the Sacred Stone Facebook page, please like that page, Sacred Stone Camp, is that they put up a link, a little Google Doc link, to help organize rides so they can get people over to these jails and bail them out of jail. Use the money that they've raised to bail them out of jail, get them back to camp, get them back on those front lines, because they're not stopping. Another thing you can do is, please come see me or check the website. The Standing Rock Sioux have a mailing address. Please go through you got old sweaters, scarves, winter clothes, gloves, long underwear, thermal underwear, anything, because they're on the open plain and it's wintertime. The harsh wind is cutting on the North Dakota plain. So camping supplies, they're in desperate need of those. And strategically, I like what's being talked about tonight is we talked about in the territories of Palestine, those fences being built, reservations of my people being thrown on. Let's break down those fences. Even though it's in Palestine, almost halfway across the world, and over at Standing Rock, it's over, many states away. Tonight you saw those barriers broken down. We can't let those fences hold us back. We have to see each other, as this says, when you see those things, you see yourself. Thank you.